Hello class, my name is Derek Evans. The project that I decided to do my presentation on was how the Hispanic workers help influence and improve the American economy. So how I'm going to relate this topic to the course that we have been doing is I'm going to relate it back to the book The Grapes of Wrath. Like the Job family, during the Dust Bowl, they had to essentially pick up all their goods, move away from their comfort zone, their homeland, and go to California and pretty much find work and restart their whole lives. I come from a very small town in which the population is about 60% white Americans, and about the other 40% I would say is immigrant workers that are coming from Mexico, Puerto Rico, and have some sort of Hispanic descent. So I always found it very interesting that about how the Hispanic culture has helped influence the American economy for many other reasons. That's kind of the introduction of how I am going to present this topic to you. Some of the other things that I'm going to look at is that since President Trump has been our new president, I want to kind of explore and see if since then has the amount of Hispanic workers coming from Mexico to the United States increased? Has it decreased? Has Donald Trump actually and truly made the unemployment rate decrease with all the minorities, especially looking at the Hispanic and Latino minority? I want to see if he has truly decreased the unemployment rate, and I also want to kind of work over what it's like to get a working visa. So the first thing I want to talk about is the pre-era of Donald Trump being our president. According to the CPER, workers from Mexican descent are by far the largest subgroup of Hispanic workers in the workforce, which is 14.9 million. According to the CPR, again, about 6.4 million of those Hispanic workers live in Mexico, live in California, Texas, Florida. So I see how that is really relevant, because those are some of the states that are, well, California and Texas are some of those states that are bordering Mexico. And then as for Florida, I can see that also because of Hispanic descent is coming over from Puerto Rico. So I found that to be a pretty interesting stat. And then according to Bureau of Labor Stats, 16.1 of the 146 million workers in America are in fact Hispanic immigrants. And then further on down in there, it starts to break that down into what kind of jobs they mainly do. 27.3 come from work in construction, 23.1 agriculture, 22.3 hospitality and leisure. And then the next three are some of the ones that I found were pretty significant. Public administration, financial activities, and information. And those were the ones that had the lowest percentage of Hispanic immigrant workers. And as in some of my research, I had found that about after 14, most of the Hispanic immigrants that were coming over to America to essentially work had no education after the age about 13 and 14. So I can see that those three may be harder for them to get a job because some of those have more educational requirements and standards that they're going to be held to. So I just found that very interesting and wanted to point that out to you guys. Since Donald Trump has been elected, the Hispanic unemployment rate was 8.5% in 2014, which is pre-Donald Trump era. And then as of last year, the Hispanic unemployment rate has been an all-time low under President Trump's administration. So, I mean, I don't know, there's not a whole lot of information really talking about if there's been a fluctuation of Hispanic immigrants in between pre and post, just because it's been such a short time. But according to Bureau of Labor, in 2026, there were 26.8 million Hispanics or Latinos in the American workforce, which since 1988, that's tripled that number. So there has been an increase, a substantial increase in Hispanic workers in the United States workforce since that almost 1990 era. So I kind of want to talk about some of the demographics of Hispanic workers, kind of the gender roles. Since 1990 to 2014 was the main focus that I had done. Female workers have actually doubled since that 1990 to 2014 era, which was really impressive because a lot of the Hispanic workers that I've personally worked around, been around, had communication with, the majority of those workers were actually males, and they moved to America to make their money, and then they send back, I would say, probably about 85% of their paychecks because their family is left behind, and they're just working for the family back in Mexico while they're staying with 5, 6, 7, 8 of their friends in a little house. So I found that to be very interesting. And then also for males, it almost doubled. It went from 9.5% to 17.7%. So I found that very interesting as well. And then another statistic that I had found is the Bureau of Labor Department says that by 2050, about 30% of our working population will be Hispanic workers, which, if we remember and we look back on the earlier parts of this presentation, right now we're at 16.1%. So that's almost going to be a doubling in Hispanic workers in the American economy, which is kind of cool to look at. And then I focused on some of the wages for Hispanic workers because a lot of them are on working visas and may not get the same opportunity as some of the other people in the working environment. So for Hispanics, the median income for a Hispanic family is $41,994, and then for white folks, it's $54,850. And what I found very interesting about this is that it breaks down the average size of families. And Hispanics are at the lower end of the spectrum when it comes to median income rates, but they're also at the top of the family average size at 2.96 people in their family. So not only are they making almost less than everybody else, but they also have the most amount of mouths to feed. So I found that very, very interesting. And then later on in the presentation, it shows that there's a lack of job opportunity and inequality for Hispanic workers, and we can see that by this chart that a lot of the Hispanic workers that do come to America are working hard labor jobs via farming, production, fabrication, operators. So they're working really, really long, hard hours. And I mean, a lot of the white folks really don't want to do those hard labor intensive jobs. So it's very important to our economy and to the well-being of all the people around us that there is a huge Hispanic population that's essentially taking that and making our economy stronger by doing those jobs. And then the last point that I want to touch on is understanding the working visa. There's so many different types of working visas that we have in the United States, and I'll go over that. But some of the requirements that the Hispanic population and many other people that want to get working visas, they must apply to get the working visa, complete the online application, they have to print out the confirmation form of that application, and then they have to schedule an interview. So 13-year-old and younger people generally aren't required to go through that interviewing process. People in between the ages of 14 and 79 are required to, and then folks that are 80 and older don't have to do that. And then some of the documentation that is required to getting a working visa is a passport, your visa application, application fees stating that you've already paid for it, photo identification, receipt numbers, and then some of the other documents that they want you to have are family relationships to where you are going and residing, your economical reasons for doing so if you plan to go working in another country, and then your long-term plans and why you're going there. So here's some of the different visas that you can get, and the main ones we're going to focus on are the temporary agricultural worker and then the temporary non-agricultural workers. So what these are basically the two forms of visas that the Hispanic population has to go through and get to be able to come to America and work. And all it is just, it's essentially a temporary use for that season of when agriculture is really booming. Then they can apply for those, and then once those are up, they generally have to go back to Mexico, but that not always is necessarily the case. They may stay longer and not renew their working visa and just stay and work for the companies that have hired them, knowing that they're essentially illegal immigrants. And then the temporary non-agriculture, which that's probably for the operations, the construction jobs, the manual labor jobs, the operation jobs. So those were some of the visas that I had mainly focused on. And this presentation was really eye-opening to see that there's such a large population of Hispanic workers that come to America as immigrants and really do help us as the United States thrive, grow, and become in better economical status as a country. And some of the main points that I have here is before 2013 there were about 16% of Hispanic workers that made up the population of the working class. Since President Trump's administration, the Hispanic unemployment rate has been going down, which is really good to see. And like I said, they have just such a wide variety of positive impact on our economical status as a country. So I'm just glad that I was able to show you guys the positive influences that the Hispanic immigrant workers have on the American economy. Thank you and have a great night.